to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that talk about a set of diverse topics. Today is no different. I've been waiting for the last couple weeks to talk to Tim. It's going to be a great conversation. We were having a little pre-show talk about that. It will be spirited. Definitely have a lot of opinions. But Tim Sparks is a senior certified human resource professional with over 20 years in HR. During his time in the HR profession, Tim has had the opportunity to work with some amazing people developing corporate programs like change management training and a very robust mentor program that kicked off his speaking career. And that is what has also led Tim to write the book, Your Journey to Becoming a Great Change Leader, Navigating the Road to Extraordinary Leadership. Tim, thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us. Certainly appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Roy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm going to be taking notes, so please don't think I'm texting my order in over to the Mexican restaurant for later on. But like I said, this is going to be a good conversation. Before we jump in, we got a lot to cover, but before we jump in, kind of tell us a little bit about your HR journey, and I'm assuming, something jumped out about being a change leader that, really spoke to you and made you want to write this book. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've been, like you said, in HR for about 20 years now. And before that, I was a teacher and principal for 15 years. Okay. And so the transition from education to HR, people ask me all the time how I, got into HR from education. And I tell people, my goal in life has really always been the same. It's always been to help others achieve their greatest potential. Mm-hmm. And so, as a teacher and principal, of course, my students were primary, and I wanted to help them to really maximize their potential. And as an HR professional, it's the same goal. So that's really why I got into HR after education. Okay.
Yeah, you probably don't. You probably didn't have to carry a gun in HR or a big stick like in like trying to teach. It's I have to.
Would have come in handy a couple of times.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I do have a lot of respect for our teachers and principals, and I won't get way off on that, but it's a tough job, and people. I don't think the normal people don't understand the time. People think they work from 9 to 3 and take all summer off, but I had an ex that was a teacher and a principal as well, and I guarantee you she worked a lot more hours than I did, and she had come
Absolutely.
home. She came home much more frazzled than I would. So God bless you for doing that. But yeah, so change management. It's it's a thing nowadays because there's so much. There's so many acquisitions, people getting, taken over, bought up. It seems kind of rampant. So I think it's really good timing. And then also, there's a lot of changes coming up with this workforce with people, are we going back to the office? Are we going remote?
Right.
There's talk about revolt if you even talk about me coming back to the office.
Right.
But then every profession, you can't watch the news now that there's not a profession that is not having some type of a staffing crisis. And then, that all goes downstream to affect others, which, eventually gets to the consumer. So I think this appears to be a time of great change for many, many different reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let me make a distinction before we kind of continue. You mentioned change management. And my book is about change leadership, and they go hand in hand, but change management is really the process side of change. It's the thing, it's managing the thing that's actually changing, whereas change leadership is actually leading people through those real, rocky emotional times of change.
Right. My apologies. Yes, I did misspeak on that. It should be change leadership, but we're definitely going to need some leadership to, help guide us through these times and keep these companies, right. We always think about change for the way of, we're doing things different and we're doing things better. But it may kind of be a little bit on the receiving end. I mean, instead of us directing the change, it's like this change is coming at us that our leaders are going to have to deal with to get us through that.
Yeah, sometimes we see a need for a change and we work toward that. And then, like you said, sometimes change is kind of thrust upon us either
Right.
by, the environment that we're in, or, legislation that comes down, from Congress or something like that. So there's lots of different reasons why change becomes necessary. But it's how we handle that and how we lead others through that time of change that really can dictate whether we fail or succeed in that change initiative.
Right. Speaking of which, what are some reasons, I guess, what are some qualities of a good change leader that you see, maybe conversely the negative ones, but then also, it's like, why do companies fail at this? It's not, we didn't just wake up yesterday and say, change is a thing. I mean, things have always been changing from, I guess, the invention of things. It's always been moving, but it seems that we have more difficulty, being successful at it today.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times organizations fail at change for multiple reasons, and I list a few of those in my book. One of the big things I think, one of the big reasons why I think companies fail is because of fear. Companies who have achieved some degree of success are fearful of change because they're afraid that if they stray from that recipe that got them success in the first place,
Right.
that they would lose what they gained. And a great example of that is Kodak. Kodak was a huge company. They were the king of print film back for forever until digital photography really kind of took over the industry. And most people don't know this, but it was actually Kodak that developed the first digital camera.
Right.
And so, ironically, they had this technology that they had developed, and they feared that if they now introduced that technology to the public, that it would diminish where they were king, and that was in the print film industry. So they decided to put that digital technology on the shelf and try to sit on it. And of course, you can't hide technology like that forever. And
Right.
and so it actually, and actually, believe it or not, Kodak developed the first digital camera back in 1975.
Wow.
Which was about 25 years before digital photography really became popular.
Yeah, that's an incredible story, and I've heard that before. But it's it just goes to the point of how things can just slip out of our grasp.
Yep.
I'm sure they thought they were on top of the world and they really didn't have anything to worry about. But obviously, I think that, if I'm not wrong, that was really one of the last assets they had, was the patent on their process when they finally ended the business. Which
Right.
It's sad for people my age anyway. I remember that was really all we had was film. Digital's just come along and later in my lifetime.
Yep. And look at a company like Blockbuster Video.
Right.
They really ignored the signs of what their customers really were telling them. They, of course, streaming, services like Netflix started to come out, and Blockbuster Video had the opportunity to work with Netflix to get into the streaming business, but they really felt like their customers still wanted to drive to the store and wait in line and look for that film that maybe was sold out, maybe not. So it was kind of a roll of the dice.
Yeah, and there's a commercial on TV that I just saw this morning, and I thought it was such a great saying, is that success is just on the other side of fear. And so it's interesting that you bring that up. It's interesting you bring that up, because I guess I'd have to ask the next question is, were they fearful of change in the market? Were they fearful? I mean, I know they must have been fearful of losing their success, but was it ego as well, that they thought that they were such a big, powerful company that the world follows them and that's all they really needed?
I think that's true in a lot of cases, especially with some of these big companies, even tech companies like Facebook and some of those big tech organizations. They feel like they're the only game in town, and they
Right.
can do pretty much what they want. And I think sometimes that comes back to bite them later.
Yeah. So how can leaders, we have to make a conscious decision to listen. I was talking to another gentleman the other day. We were talking about seek first to understand, which means basically, we have to listen. So,
Right.
I guess part of the message here is that we've got to listen to our customers. No matter how crazy we think that they may sound, eventually
Hmm.
there may be some truth in that, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely need to listen to their customers, but I think it also, Richard Branson kind of coined the phrase, forget the customer always being right. Treat your people, your employees right, and then they'll treat the customer right.
Right.
And I think that one of the traits of a great change leader is building a really solid foundation of trust with their people, so that when the leader does have that vision of what the future could be, his people or her people are eager and willing to jump on the bandwagon and follow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have seen that scenario play out before. I talked to a guy that was very successful, and he didn't invent a new product, just a kind of a variation of a place that he had
Hmm.
worked for many years. And he said, you know what? I tried to talk to him, and I've been thrown out of the office so many times that he's like, I didn't even go in this time. He just said, sent my resignation in, went out, developed it, started producing it on my own, and
Yep.
it really hurt the other people. So definitely, I don't think we do enough of that. I do a lot of talk about employee retention, and I think these kind of go hand in hand in that respect. Is that we have to listen to if we don't trust them, they shouldn't be working for us. So we have to,
Right.
we have to hire people that we trust, but then we have to listen to them, and I think that's. You might can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe was it Steve Jobs that said, we have something about giving them the task and letting them handle it and just getting out of the way, having
Yep.
that level of trust in our employees.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you talked about ego before, and I think a lot of times, especially when you get up into the C-suite and you have CEOs or CFOs, COOs that are, they have that ego, and that's what really kind of got them there in the first place.
Right.
And they feel like they should have all the answers. They should know all the solutions to every problem.
Right.
And that's just absurd, right? I
Right.
mean, nobody has the answer for everything. And so the ability to listen and to respond to when people come to us with their ideas and solutions is just critical. Colin Powell actually said, "The day that your soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them."
Right. Right. Yeah. And, that's one of the main things I look for, when in hiring is if somebody tells me or somehow, communicates to me that they have all the answers, it's a huge red flag because we just don't. And I'm more interested in people that can actually go out, and find those answers
Right.
and, kind of building on that with our employees. Most of the time, they are the closest to what's really happening out there in the field. They see how products are being used and what the feedback is from customers. So
Yep.
and unfortunately in this day of the growing companies that are so big, the C-suite are so far removed from that it's like how would they ever get that information if they don't listen to their people?
Yeah, and you hear stories all the time about new policies, new dictates coming down, into an organization, and the people that are on the front lines, kind of have this feeling like here's this dictate coming from the ivory tower from people that have absolutely no clue what it's like to actually be in the front
Right.
lines.
Yeah.
And so, until we learn to get them involved in some of these decision making processes, at least, you know, requesting their feedback and getting
Right.
their maybe rolling ideas out to them before it's actually rolled out to the, organization as a whole, and get their feedback to see if, what they have in mind really will work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's part of building a culture of trust as well. I mean, because trust runs
Sure.
both ways. I think management has to trust the employees, but employees have to trust management as well, that they're going
Absolutely.
to listen and do the
Yeah.
right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust is really a foundational principle for all of that. And it's, in my book I talk a lot about culture, and building a culture of trust is really the foundation of the pyramid of culture. You can't build a, a culture in your organization until you can build that foundational piece of trust.
Right. The, there's a lot of this overlaps. It's funny to, retention and things like that we talk about too. Is that so? Learning is a big component of this as well. And we always there's an old joke. The CFO comes to the CEO and says, "How can we afford to keep training all these people and have them leave and go to other places?" And the CEO says, "How can we not train them and have them stay here?" And so,
Right.
I think that kind of builds on, having this force that's on the cutting edge. If they are learning and we're promoting that learning and helping them to learn and encouraging them to learn, then they are going to know that, I don't know how that comes around, but like maybe, hey, I heard this thing about this digital thing or whatever that's going on. Maybe
Right.
it's something that we need to look into.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of hit on it. When we build that culture, the ultimate goal, especially when you're talking about change, is to build a culture of change,
Yeah.
which means that your organization from top to bottom is agile. They're adaptable. They're willing to change. They're willing to look at new ways of doing things. And in order to get there, besides trust, that foundation of trust, I think you need a culture of learning
Yeah.
built into your organization too. Because if your people understand that you're willing to train them and develop them for the future, then they will move mountains for you.
Right.
When change is announced, one of the first things that I always hear from employees is, how is this going to affect my job?
Right.
Am I going to get fired? Is this going to make my job obsolete or irrelevant?
Right.
Right. And if you have a learning culture in your organization where your people know that you're going to invest in them as people to develop them for success down the road, then you dispel a lot of those concerns.
Yeah, and that trust and the culture too. I think it, even if it's not big things, but we always want people to be aware of the little things, in our process, that maybe it's become a problem, maybe it was always a problem, and it was never magnified by something. But if you have that, the employees are, like I said, they're the ones closest to these things. They can know to be able to make suggestions, like, if we were to just do this a little bit different, will either provide greater value and satisfaction, or cut cost, or whatever the result may
Mhm.
be. But again, if we're not listening, we don't get those signals, and then people
Right.
quit, and then people just quit sending them after a while.
Yeah, and in today's market, like you said, it's recruiting's hard enough. Trying to find, I made the comment the other day. It used to be really hard to find top talent. Now it's just hard to find anybody that has a pulse that wants to work. And so
Right.
recruiting and retention are so critical to an organization right now, because the difficulty in recruiting means that you have to work your existing people longer hours. You have to, have them work weekends, overtime, all that, which puts a drain on them.
Yeah.
And then if they start leaving, that just, the snowball keeps getting bigger, and now you're really in trouble.
Yeah. So when we build these foundations, we've got a good company culture. We're learning, we're encouraging education and learning. We've got that trust. So what are some things that we can do as leaders to overcome, that last hurdle of fear? Because I'm sure we can do all this stuff, but it's always that nagging voice in the back of your head is, is this going to be the end, or, is this going to run this company? And I'm sure there's small incremental steps we can take, but what do you suggest on that?
Well, in my book, I talk about the change model. And there's four aspects of the change model. And the first one is change readiness. So you really have to assess whether your organization and you as a leader in particular are really ready for change. Because if you're not ready for change, then just throwing out change just for the sake of change is a kind of a recipe for disaster.
Right.
So you have to gauge your organization's readiness for change. And then the second key component of that leader model is communication. You have to have a great communication plan so that you can set clear expectations, clear goals and objectives for what this change is all about. Because the more people know about why something's changing and why it's important, right, the more invested they're going to be. So I think those are the really two critical pieces. Then we talk about change leadership and, about that building trust and all of that. And then the last part is sustainability, change sustainability, making sure that, because I think a lot of times what organizations do is they kind of half-heartedly throw this change initiative out just because, maybe the company down the road's doing it, or, they heard somebody else doing it, so they said it sounded like a good idea. And change can't be that cookie cutter, right? It's got to make sense for your organization. So it's got to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And so we talk about sustainability as well.
Yeah, because I've seen instances of that where announcement was made, we're doing whatever this change is, or then it's like management loses their focus, and then it seems what happens is now the workforce is kind of wandering out there because they really don't have any direction. They don't have that. I mean, depending on how big and what you're doing, I mean, you've got to have that enthusiastic push. You got to have, I look at the C-suite as, they're the coaches that are coming around patting people on the back saying, mm-hmm, good job, this is really going to be worth it if we can finish, and get this through. But when it kind of goes dark and we never hear about this big initiative that we're in the middle of, and all of a sudden you don't hear anything else about it, people lose interest and we go right back to where we were.
Yeah. And, it's communication. I tell leaders that communication has to come early, it has to come often, and it has to take many forms. Yeah. Because you can't just send out email after email after email and expect people to get it. People learn differently. People want to receive information differently. And so you as a leader have to be kind of that, you have to have that emotional intelligence to be able to understand how your people want to be communicated with and how to get it. And I think, again, one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is that after the change is introduced and set in motion, then they feel like their job is done and they stop communicating at that point.
Yeah.
But I think people want to know, was it worth it? Right. What are some of the metrics that we're, hitting now that we weren't hitting before, or, some of the profits and things like that made this worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I kind of work on the strategy side too. And so I want to talk about the importance of really planning this out. And everything is different. I mean, if it's a new product or service, there's all kinds of levels of intensity, but we really have to think it out, because I tell you what's worse than anything is rolling something out and it's like, day two, it's like, oh, that's a big old hiccup we didn't really think about. So,
right.
I think that, of course, we're going to get back to the trust and involving people. The communication is that we need every stakeholder involved in, well, not everyone, but we need representatives involved with input, because I may be able to, if you don't work on the line and I do, I may be able to say, hey, we can't fit this 8 foot long piece of equipment down this 6 foot, conveyor belt that we're using, or, whatever these little things are, because that is certainly a way to kill enthusiasm, is have things fall apart immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't plan things well, then the statistic is already that 70% of all change initiatives fail.
Wow.
And that's been true for the last 25 years. We haven't really moved the needle a whole heck of a lot when it comes to successful change. And so when you consider that only 30% of your change initiatives are going to succeed, then it's time we start looking at those and say, why did that succeed where the other 70% failed?
Yeah.
And planning is such a key role in the success of any change initiative, really in any business initiative, what regardless of what it is. But
Right.
when you're talking about change, if you don't plan well and, like you said, kind of identify some of those obstacles that you're going to face early on and have a plan to overcome them, then your people kind of lose that faith in you to really believe that you know what you're talking about.
Right.
And then something that we call change fatigue sets in, where if we do change poorly, or if we try to change too much, too fast, too often, then our people really get burned out. And anytime you stand up as a leader and say, okay, we've got another change initiative we're going to start, it's like, oh man, here we go again. It's instead of being that agile organization where everybody's really eager to change, it has really quite the opposite effect.
Yeah, we were kind of snickering about that before the show, is the change fatigue, and it's so real. But I think it gets back to the planning, is that we have to choose, what are the must-haves, the big things that we have to do, because what I see instances of, it's just once you start going down this path, then it's like, any little thing, hell, we need to do this, we need to do that. We haven't even finished this first major push, but yet we've already, identified 10 other. And I'm not saying we shouldn't identify them. Definitely we identify them, but if they are not detrimental to this initial push, we got to get, my opinion is we have to get so far through this initial before we start taking on all these other things. But it gets back to prioritizing. Even at that, we have to say, here's a list of our 100 wants. What are the must-haves of these wants?
Yeah. And I think sometimes as leaders, we develop these Gantt charts and we come up with these timelines, phase 1 is going to start here and phase 2 is going to start here and and we come up with these great, timelines of how things should happen. But when we do hit a snag, it's almost like we have to hit that second, phase. We got to start that second phase regardless. And instead of just taking, putting your foot on the brake a little bit and saying, okay, we didn't anticipate this. Let's regroup. Let's fix this before we move on. It tends to turn into this like multi-car pileup on the interstate. Things just really get way out of hand. And we just feel like we have to keep pushing forward, even though we're not ready.
Yeah, in planning, planning is a roadmap, and I think we set these deadlines and what we hope, but I think we have to be smart enough to be flexible, that instead of, like you said, well, we've got a drop dead date of August 1st, and we've identified a problem that's going to mess us up on phase 2, but instead of taking a minute, getting things in order, if we just push through, we just make it worse. And then, then we get back to the fatigue that the employees are like, oh my gosh, here comes another one.
Right. Yeah. And Roy, you had mentioned about, getting people at every level of the organization involved in that planning too. And I think that's such a critical piece, to get all those levels involved in brainstorming through the planning session.
Right.
And one of the things I tell leaders too is that when you're looking for those change ambassadors or change champions, whatever you want to call them, to work on your planning committee, your steering committee to roll out this change. A lot of times I tell them, find the people in your organization that are the most hesitant. They're the maybe even aggressively against the change, and get them on those committees so that they can see that bigger picture. They can see how things work together. And if you can win those people over, then you've got an outstanding champion for your cause.
Yeah, and I always use an example of back in the day when I worked in, outside. We had these. It was a special set of gloves. There were 3 different gloves, and we had a special way that we had to fold them. And for the life of me, for years, I couldn't figure it out. I would take them to, one of the older guys on the crew and be like, here, because it was a safety violation if they weren't done right. I'd be like, I don't know how. And what it ended up being is that nobody had ever really set me down and told me why it mattered. Once I got the why it mattered, I knew from then on out there was never a question. I could put those gloves back in there. And I think we lose sight of it. It's not just because I told you this is what we're going to do and what we're going to happen. People, and sometimes people are just curmudgeons and they don't want to budge on something new. But I have found that there are a segment of people that they really care about the company and they're really worried, is this really a good thing? Not only for me, but for this company, because I need to be employed here for the next 5 or 10 years. They want to make sure that it's not detrimental. So it's not always just because somebody's wanting to be a hard case, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head, because I dedicate in my book a section about explaining the why it's so important. And, even mentioned Simon Sinek in his book, Start With Why, because I believe people really want to do a good job. I think people want to feel like what they do adds value to the organization. And so if we as leaders just take a few extra moments to explain why something is important, because if you worked for me, Roy, and I said, hey, Roy, I need this out by 5 o'clock, we got a deadline, I need you to do X, Y, Z. And then I just walked out the door. You had no clue why it was important or why it had to get out the door by 5 o'clock. You're not really invested in that.
Right.
But if I take that few extra moments to say, I need this out by 5 o'clock, and here's why. We've got a customer in crisis. We need to get this out the door to them because they're needing it for, a special project they're working on or whatever. Then you become invested. You're engaged in that. And I believe employees, again, want to do a good job, and they'll move mountains for you if you do that.
Definitely. So what are some things that we, if I want to get some change in my company, and I'm going to bring somebody in, what are some things that we want to look for, not only in, if we bring in outside talent, but maybe we want to develop that change leader from within our company? What are some things that we should look for, some qualities?
Well, some of the qualities that I talk about for change leaders is, number one, they have to be able to motivate. They have to be able to, and I believe explaining the why has a big part of that. They have to be able to inspire. They have to be that kind of leader that people are naturally drawn to and want to follow. And I want to kind of back up on that just a little bit, because I don't believe you have to be a type A personality to be a great change leader.
Right.
I don't believe you have to be that, used car salesman kind of, charisma dripping out of your pores, really likable person. But in order to inspire, I think you have to just be passionate. You have to show passion to your people, that you really believe in the organization and you believe in this change, that it's going to be positive. And then, caring for your people, caring for them as individuals and not just, cogs in the wheel of production,
Right.
as a means to an end. Getting to know them on a personal level, knowing, how many kids they have. They have a dog, the cat, bird, whatever, all
Yeah.
those things that, sometimes leaders tend to shy away from because they're not comfortable getting involved on that personal level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I think that type A personality that's going to come in, like the bull in the china closet, can actually do you harm. And, I was just jotting some notes down. I was thinking, along the lines, good communicator, somebody that has empathy for other people that
Hmm.
we may disagree, but I can see that I need to try to find out where your opinion is it rooted just in the fear that we've talked about, or is it rooted in something that information you have I don't have, that I
Yeah.
really need before we do things? So communication, it's I don't think we talk about it enough, but I think in pretty
Yeah.
much all aspects of our life, it's and the old saying to me holds, is that what God gave us 2 ears and one mouth because he expected us to listen twice as much as we talk. And,
Right.
instead of me convincing you, as your boss or as your leader, however that works, is that, instead of me trying to convince you how smart I am, I probably need to listen and see how smart you are, what and we all need to survive. There really doesn't, we all have different roles, but we end up have to all pull the wagon in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I really think that l- great change leaders have to be visionaries, and I always say that visionaries are people that don't necessarily just see how the organization is today, but what it could be, down
Yeah.
the road. But they also have to be great communicators to be able to communicate that vision to others.
Right.
And we talk about being a great coach and mentor. And if you think about a great coach, whether it's a professional sport or whatever, great coaches are always great simplifiers.
Yeah.
They can always take complex concepts and ideas and break them down into simpler bite-sized pieces, so to speak, so that they can communicate that vision across their organization to get people understanding what the goal is and
Right.
then on board.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tim, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. I know we've run a little bit over, but is there anything else that you want any other points you want to convey about change leadership before we wrap this up?
Well, I did want to have a special offer for your listeners. So if the first 5 people of your broadcast, if they email me,
Okay.
I'll either email them a free book or give them a free 15-minute consultation over the phone or through Zoom,
All right.
their choice. So my email address is tim@blueridgehr.com. So the first 5 people that email me and request that, I'll get them what they want.
Okay. Great. I appreciate that. So before we get away, a couple things. First off, what is a tool or a habit? What is something that you use in your daily life? It could be professional or personal, but just something that you feel adds a lot of value.
Um, well, I guess personally, I'm a person of faith, and so spending time, in God's Word and in prayer
Yeah.
helps me a lot. From a professional standpoint, you're going to kind of laugh at me, but there's a game I play on my phone that really, I think, really helps keep my mind sharp. It's a game that is designed to kind of help you always think 2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
steps ahead.
Yeah.
And so, just things like that I do to kind of keep my mind
Yeah.
sharp.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think we don't think about exercising our mind, and I've begun to think a lot about our minds as just like our bodies, that we got to exercise them, but we also have to give them that rest, and so we need to be thinking about that, especially as we go into older age. We want to stay sharp. I never want to, I don't want my body to outlive my mind, or my mind outlive my body, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, Tim. Well, thanks so much again. Tell us, who do you like to work with? Again, how you can help them. Go ahead and give them the website again, and then tell us the name of the book so they can either reach out to you or, go over to Amazon and get that.
Okay. Well, the name of the book again is Your Journey to Becoming a Great Change Leader. The Kindle version is available on Amazon. The paperback version is available on my website. So my website is blueridgehr.com. Okay. Again, my email address is tim@blueridgehr.com. Okay. And I guess I do a lot of training sessions with leadership teams as a whole. So I'll come in, spend a couple of days with leadership teams, talk about ways to develop leadership skills, whether it's in change leadership or just leadership in general. I also do one-on-one coaching. And of course, I do public speaking as well. So if you're looking for somebody to speak at a conference, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay. Yep. Hopefully those are going to get cranked back up pretty soon. I know everybody's been pinned up for a long time. So hopefully there'll be a lot of pin-up demand to get out, and let's get these conferences rolling again.
Amen.
Seems like, you always learn so much, and there's a lot of great speakers like yourself that just really haven't been able to get out and affect the audience as normal. So hopefully we're almost there. So, all right, Tim. Well, thanks so much again. Appreciate it. That's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, you can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major social media platforms. Probably hang out on Instagram more than any place. And we're also on all the major podcast platforms. So you can find us at iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you use, please reach out. I'd be glad to get it added so you can listen to us easy. So till next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.